Ahoy and welcome back once again to the channel. For those of you new here, my name's Gary. I like watches, and if you're here watching this, you probably like watches too. And today I've got an absolute perler for you. Zelos have just sent me their latest release. It is a new version of their Skyraider, their take on a pilot's watch, and this is a sort of version 3. I have never handled the version 1 or the version 2, so this is the first time I've had hands-on experience with a Skyraider. And yeah, in this video you're going to find out everything you need to know about this watch, and pay attention because, well, their watches sell out pretty quick, especially their sort of rare metal, more limited edition versions. So if you're interested in the TI Damascus version or the Tantalum version, I really wouldn't hang about. Right, let's kick things off with the headlines. Zelos have launched a new smaller Skyraider, 40mm instead of 42mm. And because of that, they've had to source a new smaller hand wind movement, and they've opted for the Marvin 700. It's under 10mm thick, and there are 5 versions available. Right, let's now cover my first impressions. I always like to share my first impressions because quite often your first impressions are correct. You don't get time to overthink it, and when I was unboxing this watch, my first impressions were very cool dial. I like the fact that the skeletonized part of the dial slash movement is black, contrasting with the hands. I think that's been done intentionally, but I also thought perhaps the case looked a little bit big in a sort of proportional sense to the thinnest part of the bracelet. There's a lot of taper on this bracelet, and I do like bracelets to taper and taper quite a bit, but I think it also needs to have good proportions, and I just think that ratio of case diameter to the sort of thinnest part of the bracelet is a little bit off. They've also used 3 types of finishing on this watch, and I've said it quite a few times. I tend to prefer just 2 types of finishing. My favorite is a combination of brushing and polishing. On this watch you've got a bead blasted finish thrown in there as well. I guess a little bit of a nod to the fact that this is a pilot's watch. It's a tool watch, so they're trying to sort of get that message across. You know, it's not a sort of fancy watch that's supposed to be saved for special occasions. It is a tool watch. The other thing I noticed really early on, which I really like, is the contrasting colour between the movement and the balance spring. That is very, very cool. Now, I want to talk about the movement first. So that's my first impressions. Now I want to talk about the movement because this is the first time I've ever seen a watch with a Marvin 700 movement in it. It is a hand wind movement. That's why the watch is quite slim, and this movement has been around for a very, very long time. There's not a huge amount of information out there about this movement, but it looks like Zelos have sourced some Marvin 700 movements from Switzerland, and it looks to me like these movements, well, they must have been disassembled, modified to some degree, and then reassembled, because you have the Zelos logo on, well, at least 3 places on the movement. You've also got a sort of rhodium plating or coating on some of the movement. I don't think that would have been there originally. And they also mentioned that this is a skeletonized movement, so maybe they have even had these movements modified to make them more transparent. Maybe they even arranged for the ratchet wheel to be modified and sort of skeletonized to some degree. That does give you some indication as to how much power is in the movement, although it's not going to be particularly accurate, of course. Although I do like the fact that when you wind up the movement, you see that mainspring sort of tightening, that coil getting all the energy, I guess, stored inside. And because you've got 2 pieces of sapphire crystal, yes, it does have a sapphire sandwich, you can see a lot of this movement. So yeah, the crystals and the fact that it's been skeletonized and the fact that you've got a few few different colours. It looks like they've put a lot of time and effort into getting the movement like this, and it is a Swiss movement. Yes, it's a hand wind movement. I know some people out there would much prefer this watch to be an automatic watch, but they've opted for a hand wind movement. The previous versions had a hand wind movement in them as well. They obviously want to keep the thickness of the watch down, and yeah, I love the fact that they've chosen this movement. It's very cool. Now let's move on to the materials used. I've already mentioned the sapphire crystal. This is a titanium case and bracelet, hardened titanium 1200 HV, so it's going to be more scratch resistant than, well, non-treated titanium watches. The finishing, well, you would expect for this sort of money, does look very impressive. Titanium is not an easy material to work with. Yeah, polished surfaces on titanium watches can look a little bit streaky. Transitions don't tend to be that clean and crisp usually, but yeah, the brushing on this watch, I like the brushing on the side of the case actually. That's a little bit different. You've got some polished facets on the inside of the lugs. I do like sort of sharp angled lugs, not sharp in terms of it's going to hurt you or cut you, but sharp in terms of, you know, there are some very clear corners where you swap from one type of finishing to another. I can't see any surfaces on the case that have that sort of bead blasted finish. It looks to be only the bracelet, that sort of single facet running down the center of the bracelet, that has that bead blasted finish. Yes, I would prefer that to be brushed, but it's a fairly minor thing. The polishing on the bracelet looks good. The clasp appears to be fully brushed. Screw down case back, pull push crown, and double-ended quick release spring bars. Fantastic clasp with a really nice on-the-fly adjustment system. I've often said I don't want these sort of bulky on-the-fly adjustment systems to appear on every single watch, but actually this one doesn't appear to be too bulky. It looks like a fairly normal clasp, doesn't it? Solid, nicely finished. Yeah, I like the clasp. The bracelet integrates into the case nicely. Solid end links, solid links, screw pins, and it looks like every single link is removable, so you shouldn't struggle to get a good fit with this watch, even if you've got a smaller than average wrist. Big dial, big hands, a fairly decent sized crown. It's very easy to use. It is a pilot's watch, let's not forget. There is some lume on this watch. I'll show you my usual 5-minute lume degradation clip at the end of the video, and thankfully it does look like they have been conscious of legibility, and I think that's one of the reasons why they actually coated the movement and made it black, and you've still got silver hands with lume, and during the day that lume is bright white, so that contrasts well against the the color of the movement. So I don't think legibility is going to be an issue for this particular watch. Now, like any watch, it's not perfect. There are a few things I would change if ever they were to make a version 4. I would put the print that's on the case back, the crystal on the case back I should say, I'd engrave that into the titanium case, or the titanium part of the case back. I'd also remove the bead blasted elements on the bracelet, and perhaps make the thinnest part of the bracelet 1 millimeter or maybe even 2 millimeters thicker. But you know what, I think that's probably it, and those are really sort of personal things. Yeah, it's a really cool watch, isn't it? There's no denying Zelos make very, very cool watches. Of course, you're gonna pay more for a Zelos, or for most Zelos watches, than you would for your just sort of general average micro brand watch. Is Zelos a micro brand anymore? Well, that's a discussion for another day, I think. But they do tend to make watches in fairly low numbers. There's only 75 of this particular model being made. This is number 49. 5 versions available, so there's not going to be a lot of these watches available, and the prices, well, they range from $1,749 up to $2,500 basically for the more expensive TI Damascus and tantalum versions. So yes, you are going to pay a premium, but for the work that they've put into this watch, I don't think it's a bad sum of money at all. Yes, you are talking about Christopher Ward sort of money, but I do think Zelos, with these sort of releases, They are up there with Christopher Ward. I've reviewed a number of Christopher Ward watches now, and on a few of them, the finishing has been a little bit questionable. They are quite expensive. Christopher Ward are sort of pushing into that sort of Tudor, sort of lower end luxury watch market. And with these watches, Zelos are definitely giving people in that market an extra brand or an extra watch here and there to think about. Yeah, they're definitely in the mix, aren't they? And yeah, I wouldn't be at all surprised if this watch sells out pretty quick. All right, guys, it's now your turn to let me know what you think of the watch and the review in the comments section. And yeah, like I said, if you're interested in this watch, I wouldn't hang around. Link in the video description. It's not an affiliate link. It just takes you to their website. Right, guys, enjoy the rest of your week.